Okay, let's get started. So welcome back to another week of masterclasses. Today we're going to do something special for the holidays. We're going to do a quick itemization guide, as I mentioned, and then we will be going into lol chest reviews. So this will be after the class. Stick around if you want to get your lol chest reviewed. I'll take a look at your augments, your items, and this is all the fun stuff you could do by attending these live masterclasses. So without further ado, let's get started. Pretty basic stuff today. We're just going to talk about, I made an overall tier list for a majority of the items. Some items aren't included. I'll talk about them and why. I'll talk about slammable items. So these are items you're just going to make when you have the chance. Some of them are the best, some are optimal, suboptimal, and then items that are situational. And then very last one is we're going to talk about some key units, some really important units and like strong units right now. Talk about the best in slot on them. I'll talk about some like errors that I see people building like the wrong things on them, even though it seems correct. And I'll just explain the whole like philosophy behind that. If you have any questions, feel free to unmute your mic or type in the chat and I'll be happy to answer it. Okay, itemization guide. Here's our holy grail. Of course, you won't be making these items every game, but these 4 items are extremely good right now. Infinity Edge, Red Buff, Steadfast Heart, and Even Shroud. Infinity Edge is just goes on multiple carries this set, or at least this patch. Has a very good item. Red Buff, really good. Wounds, burns, and gives a lot of attack speed and bonus damage. Even Shroud is a good way to kill Cloak, and it's better than Last Whisper. I'll talk about why later. And then Steadfast Heart is arguably the best tank item in the game and is extremely good when paired with Crown Guard. So these are some really good items right now. As you will see, they are all included in S. So I'll talk about S first. So these are items that are just extremely good. If you have the chance to make them, you will most likely be making them. So Infinity Edge, Red Buff, Giant Slayer, Blue Buff. So both of the buffs, so Bobo and a tier are extremely good. There's a lot of holders for them. Steadfast Heart, I mentioned why that's good. Runons is really good because 80 flex is really strong right now. Playing around that Ezreal, playing around that Caitlyn, eventually going level 9 and then capping around like Jhin, Alawi. So Runons is good on them. Also, it's a really good early game item if paired with attack damage. And then the CG, these are, since it's set 10, like we added like new items, it's not available online. So CG is Crown Guard. Crown Guard is also S tier. It kills Rod if you're playing AD Flex, which is hard to kill Rod. When I say kill, I mean like gets uses the component for a good item. And then also Crown Guard paired with Heart Steel or Steadfast Heart is really good. And then also Even Shroud is better than Last Whisper. I'll explain that right now. There's a recent information that came out where Last Whisper does not apply Sunder for the first instance of its item use, as opposed to Even Shroud, which applies like Sunder basically as soon as the combat starts. Even Shroud is just the physical damage version of Spark. So that's why instead of like missing out on that first instance of Sunder, Even Shroud will always have the last or the Sunder effect up, and it's very good. Put it on a frontline unit that will survive for a long time, and the enemy team will be sundered. So these are S tier. Move on to the A tier. So these items are good. Some of them are just worse versions of the S tier items, but still good, like Hodge, Gunblade, BT, Deathblade, Edge of Knights, Guardbreaker, Spark, Shojin, and these gloves. So these are all just, they're good items. If you have the chance to either make an S or an A, obviously you're going to make an S, but the A items are still good. Moving on to B, I won't name all of them, but these are items that there's just better versions of them. So for example, most of the time, like almost all the time, these 3 tank items, Bramble Vest, Dragonclaw, and Gargoyle, they're just worse versions of the Steadfast Heart, Warmogs, and Crown Guard, like triple core. Like these like 1, 2, 3 is just so much tankier than this like 1, 2, and 3. So that's why they're in B. If you have the chance to make the first set, then definitely make these S tier items as well. And then other things like Ginsu's versus Red Buff. Like Red Buff just offers so much more. Jill Gauntlet, there are so many AP users that use better items than Jill Gauntlet spell crits. Morello's once again. So these are just items like they're good situationally, or sometimes you do have to make it. You won't always get S tier items. And then yeah. C is more situational. Archangel is only good on a couple units. I would say like Twisted Fate is one of the main ones that come to mind. But that's about it. Yeah. Spark, there's just better ways to get Shred or Shred. Like it's good. It's good, but Like there, I mean, you can also just build Spark. Maybe Shift should actually be in C, so maybe I should bump that up. But it's definitely not an item that you're gonna make early. And then last but not least, almost my never builds, Quicksilver and Rabadons. The reason why Quicksilver is just bad is because there's a lot of single target damage right now. Okay, first off, there's two things. Number one, there's no like backline CC access that you need to be worried about other than like Thresh, but that's easily positionable. So there's no like Blitzcrank hooks, there's no like Thresh like corner hooks. So we're never building Quicksilver on a backline carry. And then two, if we are going to put it on a melee carry, which would be the case that it would be, because of the single target damage right now, something like an Ari, right? Getting like being CC immune is not as useful as having an aggro drop of the Edge of Night. So if you are going to put like a defensive either Quicksilver or Edge of Night is just a lot better, and then it'll give you that extra attack speed as well, good stats. So yeah, that's why Quicksilver is not good. And then last but not least, Rabadons. You might be making this on Ari. I'll explain later why that's not good. Actually, I'll explain now. Ari gets so much innate like AP from her KDA traits, from her Spellweaver traits, that adding extra AP is not as beneficial as other stats. Even though you get plus 8% bonus damage, like the actual item value is not that good. And then also if you're going to put it on like a Twisted Fate, Disco is a stall comp, which is why Archangels is a lot better than Rabadons. So this is the overall tier list. I see message. Are there any Radiant items that jump / fall in the tier list? I wouldn't say anything like too crazy. I think like Radiant damage items are a lot better. So like Radiant IE is really good. Radiant GS is extremely good. And probably just stick to those. If you get something else, like I play like Radiant Runons before, I would just say like Radiant versions of the S tier items are all pretty acceptable. At least most of them. I probably would not do like Radiant, like Even Shroud or Radiant Crown Guard. I'd stick it to like damage, like probably these 4 and maybe the Runons. Gunblade is also good, but good question. Okay, so that is the item tier list. Take it with a grain of salt. Some are different, changing based off of your playstyle, but at least the overall meta, what I've come to interpret, is this accuracy. The next one is slammable items. So these are items like when you have the components, you're just going to make them right away, either to like play tempo, either to save HP and just try to kill as many units as possible. And then most of the time, if you're slamming this, you're going to be playing around some other open components that has a higher cap or a better out. So for example, if you have to slam, let's say like a Runons, like if you have bow and cloak, then maybe like you play around the sword, because you're not going to slam BT or you're not going to slam GS. That'd be an example of that. Okay, so S tier, these are ideal items. If you have the chance, you're going to be making these. I think it's basically everything I included. Yeah, it's basically everything included except for Giant Slayer. Giant Slayer is really good late game. However, you will not be slamming this early game because there are no giants. Everyone is below the 1600 HP threshold. So you won't be slamming GS, and save that sword for something like an Infinity Edge, or save that bow for something like a red buff or Runons. Okay, enter A tier. These are just items that they're good, mostly for tempo. Some of them are worse versions of the S tier version or S tier items, but these will get you through the mid or the early to mid game, save some HP, kill some units, you're good to go. And then the last one, B, is situational items. So these are either like supporting items, so you have like Shred or like Sunder. Once again, like something like an Even Shroud is better than a Last Whisper, but sometimes you have like too many bows or you don't have the Even Shroud components, or just like making like a Gargoyles or a Redemption just to save HP, and it's very situational. Okay, so we talked about an overall item tier list, talked about what items are good, what items you should be slamming right now, and what items you shouldn't be slamming. I forgot to mention that this NT is Gnasher's Tooth. Gnasher's Tooth is good. The main carries you'd be using this on, Annie as a 1 cost, kind of Lulu as a 3 cost, but mainly it's Ari and Twisted Fate. And the thing with slamming Gnasher's Tooth is the users are pretty limited. Like if you're not playing Ari or Twisted Fate, or more importantly, if you don't hit Ari or Twisted Fate, this item is really not going on anybody else. So that's why it's very limited, and you definitely have to hit your carry in order to make use of this item. That's why I put it in A and not S tier. It's a great item. It's best in slot on both Ari, and it's really good on Twisted Fate, but it's very very situational. You definitely have to hit those units. Yes, Adaptive Helm is also missing from the tier list. I forgot to add it. Thank you for letting me know, but also it didn't show up in the maker because it's a new like set 10 item. I say Adaptive is a solid B. The item is okay. It kills the cloak because like cloak isn't that good of a component, but the tier like blue buff is good. I guess it's okay. Like most of the time, if you have too many tiers, then definitely like make adaptive, and then because you could also be making that tier for Shojin. There's a lot of Shojin users. It's a solid B. Good question. And then slam wise here, it would probably also be like a B. I don't think it could go up to A tier. It's think of it like a budget declaw that gives the user a lot more mana. So you would be putting this in lobbies that have a lot of magic damage, and on units that won't be casting very often when getting hit. So for example, like a Thresh or a Mumu are extremely good users of the Adaptive Helm. Okay, yeah, no worries. So that is the tier list. I'll run it really briefly over at the very end just to refresh your memory, and then we're gonna moving on to key units. So these are units that are really good in today's patch, and we'll talk about some like misinterpretations of their item builds and what to properly build on them and why. So the first one is Ari. Her traits are KDA and Spellweaver. As I mentioned earlier, this gives a lot of AP, right? KDA will also give you some HP and attack damage. Great, HP is always good. Attack damage, she doesn't use it. So mainly AP from both the Spellweaver trait and the KDA trait. So what does this mean? Because she's going to be having so much AP, like this raw stat of AP, she will benefit a lot more from all other stats that are like related to her kit. So basically everything except for attack damage. So like this is attack speed, mana gen, spell crits, and amplifiers. So this means instead of building items like Archangel and like Rabadons on her, you want to be building items like Nashor's Tooth, right? With a mana of 30, she will be casting very often and proccing Nashor's Tooth, getting that % attack speed, and extremely good on her, like allowing her to cast very often. Blue buff, lowering that 30 down to 20, so now she's only casting twice. And also both of these items, they give AP, which I mentioned, like you don't want to be just building pure AP, but like AP isn't bad on her, like it's good. You just don't really want to be building an excess, right? So at least these stats are good. And then last but not least, the third one, it's relative. It could be Gunblade, it could be Giant Slayer, it could be Jewel Gauntlet, and sometimes it could be Red Buff. I probably substitute the Red Buff for Nashor's Tooth, or else it's too much attack speed, you actually need some damage. But I wouldn't stray away from the third item being anything other than Gunblade, Giant Slayer, and then worst case Jewel Gauntlet. Having spell crit for so much AP is really good because it's multiplicative based off of your raw AP. So a lot of something multiplied by however much crit you have equals even more of that a lot of something. So that's why it's very good. Just remember, look at the traits that your unit has and what stats those traits provide, and then make sure that you're building different from that, so then you're very well rounded and able to make use of everything. The reason why Shojin is just worse, Shojin, it gives you, I think, 25 attack. Actually, I think they might have nerfed it. I think it might even be 20 attack damage, 20 AP, and then a bit of starting mana, and then like 5 mana on every attack. So then if it's 30 mana, you attack, you gain 10 mana per attack. It's still going to be 2 autos, right? Because now you're getting 15, so then 15, 15. But the stats of the actual item are worse than blue buff. Blue buff at least gives you that like % damage increase. Also, it gives you like AP, it gives you AD, which is I guess the same thing. But that % damage amplifier is better than just random, or not random, but like getting like the exact same stats minus the amplifier. So yeah, that's why blue buff is better than Spear Shojin. And then if you're, or I guess I'll just go into the next slide. Another great user of blue buff is Ezreal. You might be thinking the exact same thing, like, oh, but I've been building Spear, or I think Spear is good. The same reason, like, Amplifier is just better than no Amplifier, and they both do the exact same thing. So that's why, I'll also explain how to read or interpret Delta. after I explain what items to build. So Big Shot Ezreal, Heartsteel doesn't give any combat, so I'll just be talking about Big Shot. From this trait, you gain a lot of attack damage. So what does this mean? You ideally want to be building everything other than attack damage. Remember, it's not that attack damage is bad, it's just that you already have a lot of attack damage and you want to be well-rounded. You want your attack speed or slash some sort of managen, spell crit to really synergize with this raw amount of attack damage you have, and then amplifiers. Remember that amplifier is not technically spell crit, although spell crit quote unquote like amplifies your damage. Amplifier is like percent bonus increase, like percent bonus damage increase. So this is coming from like red buff and blue buff, and even technically guard breaker. So best in slots, although guard breaker is good, if we look at the games played is not nearly as much as your Infinity Edge, red buff, and your blue buff, like 50,000 compared to 10,000, right? So that's 5 times more. I would say best in slot that you want to be building on your Ezreal is going to be your blue buff, red buff, and then +1. This +1 could be either Giant Slayer or Infinity Edge, and I wouldn't stray across anything other than that. Last Whisper, remember you can have the Even Shroud, and Gunblade is just not that good. And then we start getting into the bad items. So I do blue buff for sure, right? It's very easy to remember because Ezreal is just both buffs and then Infinity Edge or Giant Slayer. So blue buff, red buff, and then IE, Infinity Edge, right, slash Giant Slayer. Now I'll explain Delta. All these stats that I'm getting from is from tactics.tools. No, we're not sponsored by them. It's just a third-party website that I use to review stats and confirm my suspicions. By going into the Explorer, you can search for, filter for certain situations. So here I search for like a 2-star Ezreal and 2 Big Shot. So it's gonna now tell me like, oh, what are the best items for this situation, right? What is the best items for a 2-star Ezreal that has 2 Big Shot in? And then if you sort by delta, negative delta is good. That means it's lowering your average placement, right? A negative, like you're going from like you're getting closer to 1, and then positive delta means you are increasing your average placements, so you're going closer towards 8th place. So when looking at this, remember that the lowest number for delta means the item is really good on that carry, and then higher delta means that item is bad. Not necessarily bad, it's just not as good relatively. So that's how you interpret delta. Remember, negative is good, positive is bad. And then remember, just like take into consideration the amount of games played, right? If something has a low sample size, then perhaps that data is inaccurate. Okay, so that's Ezreal, both buffs, Infinity Edge or Giant Slayer, and you will pop off. Make sure you have some frontline, and the Ezreal will do very good things. The next one is Samira. I see people building Ginsus on Samira, and oh no. So let's take a look at Country Samira, right? What does this trait offer? Well, the trait offers Omnivamp and attack speed. Attack speed from 3 country when the horse comes out, Hecarim, or I think it's called like the Midnight Steed is the official term, and Omnivamp from the 5 country. So make sure that you remember that you have these stats incorporated into 3, and 5 country, which means that Samira will benefit from things other than this. So spell crit, attack damage specifically, and amplifiers. Within her kit, attack speed is like integrated into like her crit, so you don't need like red buff or like Ginsu's, which is a misconception. As you see here, Ginsu's is a positive delta of 0.5. So what are the best items? Well, we need spell crit and we need AD. So Infinity Edge is by far the best items. Second one is Last Whisper, and the third one is either Giant Slayer or Deathblade, depending on the lobby. Most of the time it will be Giant Slayer because you're going to be front to back hitting a tank or hitting the front line first, as most comps are. Now the reason why Last Whisper is actually good, I've been talking about this Even Shroud versus Last Whisper, is you want to have 100% crit on Samira, and Last Whisper gives you crit. So yes, you could build Even Shroud, but I think like if you have Giant Slayer, Deathblade, and Infinity Edge, it's okay. It's a reasonable substitute, but because of her crit mechanic, building Last Whisper on Samira is fine. As you can see, almost a negative 0.5 delta. So 3 items, Infinity Edge, Last Whisper, and then either Giant Slayer or Deathblade. And if you don't have Last Whisper, make sure you have an Even Shroud on your 3-star Mumu, and your same siding your Samira and your Amumu. So whatever Samira is attacking is being sundered by your Amumu's Even Shroud. Okay, there's also a secret tech. You could go double Infinity Edge and then either Last Whisper or a double Infinity Edge plus one of these if you have the Sunder. This is in the case where you just have like too many swords, too many gloves, and double Infinity Edge is perfectly fine. You will do a lot of damage. Okay, and the very last one that I want to talk about is some misconceptions just of like main units that people are building this patch is Caitlyn. So we look at her traits, right? Rapid Fire and 8-bit. Right away, we recognize that these traits offer attack speed from Rapid Fire and attack damage from 8-bit, which means Caitlyn will benefit from stats like Spell Crit and Amplifiers. One more thing, she's incredibly good with true damage spats. You can go 6 true damage with Rapid Fire, your Senna, and your Caitlyn. Ideally, you'd want to have 8-bit Caitlyn in this time, and then it will literally one-shot enemy carries. The amount of damage that 6 true damage Caitlyn will do is insane. I see here it's almost a -1 delta, so I'm not sure if it's actually a full placement. I don't think that's how it works, but like the lower this number is, delta, is the better the item. Okay, Deathblade is a very low delta. I think it's okay. Like, I think it's good. It's definitely not as good as Infinity Edge. So this is why you have to interpret the data a little bit. If you are interested in this, but if not, then just listen to what I'm saying and I'll tell you the best items. If you are building Caitlyn, ideally you want to have true damage spat, Infinity Edge +1. I think my +1 right now, red buff is extremely good, or Giant Slayer is extremely good. If you don't have these, Deathblade is still fine. Like having an 8% bonus damage increase along with AD, where you will be using AD a lot from just your auto attacks and your spell scaling, is perfectly fine. And then I would not build any of other these. Like Last Whisper is you can just build Even Shroud once again. Especially don't build Last Whisper if you have true damage, because you're no longer doing physical damage, you're now just doing true damage. And then like Hand Justice Spear Ginsu's is just not as good. You want to be like one-shotting people with your ults, and you already have the attack speed. You don't want to be, it's better to like cast less and like one-shot with your ultimates than like cast a lot and do not very much damage from those multiple casts. So reiterating, true damage spat if you can, then Infinity Edge, red buff, Giant Slayer, Deathblade, some of this. If you don't have true damage spats, that's fine as well. Make sure you have some sort of front line, and you are stacking up your 8-bit with Garen if it's a Rapid Fire Caitlyn, and you should be good to go. Alright, that is everything for today's class. Turned out a little bit longer because I kind of talked more in depth about the items, but I'll just show the tier list once again. If you have the chance to build these S tier items, I think it's extremely good. I'll talk about like main holders for each one. So Infinity Edge, any AD user. I'll talk about mainly like higher cost carries. So like your Ezreal, your Caitlyn, your Akali, your Zed, even like your Viego is extremely good. And then other 3 cost carries, your Samira and Yone. So that's like 6 right there. I don't even name like the 2 cost or the 5 cost. Like red buff, any user that needs to be attacking a lot, like is able to hit multiple units. Your Akali's, your Ezreal's. Giant Slayer is just good on anyone that does damage late game. Blue buff is mainly going to be your Ezreal, your Ahri, your Qiyana, your Jhin, and sometimes your Lulu reroll. Not really anyone uses other than that. I don't think Kai'Sa reroll is that good. Then these 2 items, or these 3 items, this is going to be like your biggest tank. Your Steadfast Heart, your Warmogs, and your Crown Guard. It synergizes so well together. Your Warmogs and your Crown Guard keep you above the 50% maximum HP threshold for a higher damage reduction of the Steadfast Heart. And it works out so well. Like when you see this, you're just happy. Like it's so good. Then Even Shroud just for your Sunder. So I think that's all. I'm just going to quickly read a comment. Someone hasn't gotten wait, this is extremely informative. Okay, perfect. Most guides want you to build Infinity Edge, Shojin, Last Whisper for my case. Yes, there's a lot of there's a deeper interpretation like for itemization. Like you can't always just take everything at face value. There's a lot of like third-party sites that say like, oh, like you should just build this, like casting more is very good, which technically is not wrong, but sometimes you have to read in between the lines. So thank you for that comment. I really appreciate it. So that is all for the recording and for the class.